Today we're diving into a series of shocking cases and the fates of death row inmates set to face their final sentences in April of 2025. From brutal murders to relentless appeals, justice is finally being carried out. Who will pay the price for the crimes they committed? Let's uncover the stories behind these cases and the criminals now staring death in the face. Stay tuned. Welcome to Crimes Unearthed 911. 1. Mikal Tanzi, Florida. On April 8, 2025, Mikal Tanzi is scheduled to be executed in Florida, the final chapter of a brutal murder case that has haunted the state for over 2 decades. The killing of Janet Acosta, a production supervisor at the Miami Herald, was not only a devastating personal loss for her family, but also a chilling example of cruelty and the long, complex fight for justice. Tanzi's story is more than that of a killer. It's a decades-long legal battle filled with appeals, denials, and controversy that the public hasn't forgotten. On April 25, 2000, at just 20 years old, Tanzi kidnapped Janet Acosta after a chance encounter. She was driving when Tanzi forced her out of her vehicle and abducted her. He took her to a remote location, far from anyone who might hear her screams. There he shot her in the head, killing her instantly. Not stopping there, Tanzi left her body in a wooded area, hoping that darkness and time would erase his crime, but his efforts failed. Evidence and eyewitness accounts quickly led investigators to identify Tanzi as the prime suspect. He was arrested and sentenced to death. But for over 20 years, Tanzi refused to accept his fate. He repeatedly appealed the sentence, claiming he was innocent and demanding a new trial. One of his main arguments was his severe obesity. His legal team insisted that his condition could interfere with the lethal injection process and result in an unnecessarily painful death. Despite this argument being presented multiple times in court, judges dismissed it. The court ruled that personal medical conditions do not erase the brutality of his crime. Tanzi's endless appeals have drained the legal system's time and resources, yet they also show how far a guilty man will go to escape justice. But facts have never changed. Tanzi murdered an innocent woman. His crime was unforgivable, and the way he ended Acosta's life left her family in permanent grief. Despite the pain, her family has remained resilient, fighting to protect her memory and to ensure justice is served. After decades of delay, the state of Florida has set the execution date, April 8, 2025. Though the pain of losing Janet Acosta will never truly heal, her loved ones may find a measure of closure knowing that justice is finally being delivered. Her family didn't just fight for her, they fought for justice itself. Even though Tanzi continues to claim innocence, his silence in the face of execution may speak louder than words. That silence could be seen as a final acknowledgement of the price he must pay for what he did. Excuses may have been made, appeals may have been filed, but the brutality of his actions is undeniable. Justice, though delayed, has found its path. April 8, 2025 will mark a critical moment in this long and painful case. The story of Mikal Tanzi stands as a grim reminder. No matter how horrific the crime, justice will prevail in the end. 2. Mikal Mahdi, South Carolina. On April 11, 2025, Mikal Mahdi is set to face execution in South Carolina, marking the end of a legal battle that has dragged on for more than 2 decades. The deaths of Christopher Jason Boggs and James Edward Myers were not only heartbreaking losses for their families, but also key moments in a long and painful pursuit of justice. Mahdi, a cold-blooded killer, spent years filing appeals and attempting to dodge the punishment he was given. Back in 2004, Mahdi committed a string of brutal crimes across Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. He murdered Christopher Boggs, a 29-year-old convenience store worker, and James Myers, a 56-year-old police officer. These were not random or isolated killings. They were the result of a violent spree involving robbery, kidnapping, and murder. What made it even more disturbing was Mahdi's complete lack of remorse. He trapped his victims, took their lives without hesitation, and never looked back. After the killings, Mahdi fled, but law enforcement didn't let him disappear. Through forensic evidence left at the scenes and witness testimony, investigators were able to trace his movements. Blood traces, fingerprints, and other evidence allowed them to track him down over the course of several months. Eventually, he was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and robbery. These were not just innocent victims, they were respected members of their communities, which made their deaths even more devastating. Mahdi was sentenced to death in 2006, but instead of accepting the ruling, he launched appeal after appeal, doing everything he could to delay his execution. One of the primary arguments from his legal team was that his original trial failed to present key mitigating circumstances, particularly his traumatic upbringing in a violent, impoverished environment. His attorneys argued that Mahdi suffered psychological damage throughout his youth, and that these factors should have been considered more seriously. These claims became central to their plea for clemency, hoping they might either reduce his sentence or postpone the execution. But those efforts didn't succeed. Judges, prosecutors, and much of the public agreed that Mahdi didn't deserve leniency. His crimes were simply too brutal, too calculated, and too inhumane to be excused. Prosecutors pointed to his extensive history of violence and insisted that reducing his sentence would be an injustice in itself, a betrayal to the victims and their families. One unusual aspect of this case is Mahdi's choice of execution method, the firing squad. This decision stirred widespread debate about the humanity of such a method. It would be only the second time in more than a decade that a death row inmate in South Carolina has chosen this option. Critics argue that executions by firing squad are barbaric and emotionally damaging to those tasked with carrying them out. Being part of the firing squad means having to pull the trigger that ends a life, a burden that doesn't go away easily. Still, Mahdi stood by his decision, insisting on his right to choose how he would die rather than accept lethal injection. Though the execution hasn't yet taken place, the families of the victims hold on to a fragile hope that seeing Mahdi held accountable will bring some small measure of peace. His death won't bring back the lives he stole, but it may finally close a long, painful chapter. No more appeals, no more delays, just justice, however belated. And yet, those left behind must still carry the weight of their loss for the rest of their lives. April 11, 2025 will be the day that justice finally catches up with Mikal Mahdi. Though he still maintains his innocence, his silence in the face of execution may speak volumes. Mahdi, who caused so much pain, will finally pay the price for what he did. His story is not just one of cruelty, it's a reminder that no matter how long the road, justice always finds a way. 3. Moises Mendoza, Texas. On April 23, 2025, Moises Mendoza is scheduled to be executed in Texas, marking the end of a long and painful journey of brutal crime and relentless legal appeals. The murder of Rachel O'Neal Tolson, a 20-year-old woman, wasn't just a heartbreaking tragedy for her family. It became a symbol in the ongoing debate over justice, remorse, and the death penalty. Mendoza's story is a grim mix of violence, regret, and legal warfare that has forced both those directly involved and society at large to wrestle with difficult moral questions. On March 18, 2004, Mendoza, who was 23 at the time, committed a horrific murder. His victim was Rachel Tolson, a young mother living in Farmersville, Texas, with her 5-month-old daughter. That night, Rachel left her mother's house to return home. The next morning, her family found her house door wide open, her belongings scattered, and her baby daughter left alone inside. Rachel had vanished. The police launched a search immediately after confirming she was missing. Mendoza quickly became the prime suspect. Just a week earlier, he had attended a party at the Tolson home. Though Rachel had rejected his attention, he remained fixated on her. Mendoza later confessed to strangling Rachel until she lost consciousness, then driving her to a remote field. There, he raped her and continued to strangle her until she died. To cover his tracks, he moved her body and set it on fire. But the crime scene evidence, along with witness statements, quickly led investigators to Mendoza. He was arrested within days and admitted to killing Rachel. He told authorities she had willingly entered his truck, leaving her baby alone at home. He claimed they argued, and in a fit of rage, he choked her to death. He then tried to destroy the evidence, but failed to escape the law. In 2006, Mendoza was sentenced to death, but the case didn't end there. His defense team criticized the original trial, arguing that Mendoza grew up in a violent and emotionally deprived environment, which may have contributed to his actions. They claimed that mitigating factors were overlooked and that Mendoza's remorse should be taken into account. Still, both judges and prosecutors rejected these appeals, pointing to the brutality of the crime as beyond forgiveness. Even so, the fight over Mendoza's fate hasn't stopped. Human rights organizations and some members of the public have continued advocating for clemency. They argue that Mendoza has expressed deep remorse and could serve the rest of his life in prison, allowing for redemption. But these efforts have so far failed, and Mendoza remains scheduled for execution on April 23, 2025. Although the execution hasn't yet taken place, the family of Raquel Tolson, along with many others, still hopes for last-minute intervention from the governor of Texas or the state's Board of Pardons and Paroles. Mendoza's death won't bring Raquel back, nor will it fully heal the pain her loved ones carry, but it may finally bring closure to a long, emotionally exhausting chapter. Justice, however delayed, will be delivered. Yet for Rachel's family, the scar of her loss will never fade. 4. James Osgood, Alabama. On April 24, 2025, James Osgood is scheduled to face execution in Alabama, marking the end of a long and painful legal journey filled with controversy. The murder of Tracy Lynn Brown, a 23-year-old woman, wasn't just a heartbreaking tragedy for her family. It became a stark reminder of brutal crimes and the unresolved questions society continues to ask about justice, remorse, and mercy. Osgood's story is not only a murder case. It's a confrontation between a remorseless killer and the ongoing search for justice for his victim. On October 23, 2010, Tracy Lynn Brown was found dead inside her home in Chilton County, Alabama. She had failed to show up for work that day, which raised concern among her employer. When her family and friends couldn't reach her, they contacted the police. Officers arrived and discovered Tracy's body, revealing clear signs of a vicious, violent assault. She had been brutally attacked and murdered in her own home. At the time, James Osgood was 36 years old. Along with his girlfriend, he carried out the crime. Investigators quickly identified Osgood as the prime suspect. During questioning, he confessed to the killing. He admitted that he and his girlfriend had fantasized about kidnapping and murdering someone and had chosen Tracy as their target due to perceived vulnerability and a loose personal connection. After murdering her, they tried to cover it up by moving her body and staging the scene, but witness statements and forensic evidence soon exposed their lies. Osgood was convicted not only of murder but also of rape and physical abuse. However, in the years that followed, he filed appeals, not to overturn his sentence but to request his own execution. Osgood stated that he no longer wanted to live in prison or continue fighting the legal process. In a letter to his attorneys, he wrote, "I no longer feel alive. I'm tired. I want to complete my sentence." While human rights groups and even some members of the victim's family called for clemency, Osgood waived his right to further appeals and formally requested the state to schedule his execution. His decision sparked division. Some believed Osgood deserved to face death for the cruelty of his crime. Others questioned the morality of executing someone who no longer wished to live, especially one who claimed to be remorseful and emotionally exhausted. The debate raised difficult questions about mercy, justice, and the role of the state in carrying out capital punishment. On April 24, 2025, when Osgood's sentence is carried out, it won't just be the end of his story. His execution won't bring Tracy Lynn Brown back, but it may put an end to the years of appeals and delays that followed her death. The stories of Moises Mendoza, Mikal Mahdi, Michael Tanzi, and James Osgood all reflect the brutality of crime and the deep moral tensions surrounding justice. Each man has his own story. Each one committed an unforgivable act. Whether they showed remorse or filed appeal after appeal, justice must be served. Thank you for watching. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Crimes Unearthed 911 for more powerful true crime stories. We'll see you in the next video.